Welcome to the Boundless Podcast, exploring the human side of work. I'm your host, Paul Millard, and I'm fascinated with how we can imagine past the default path to do things that matter. I have conversations with entrepreneurs, freelancers, and thinkers who are questioning the role of work in our lives, who are thinking about how we can unlock creative potential in ourselves and organizations, and are carving new paths in the world to create a more human future of work. If you want to support the podcast, check out the Patreon link in the show notes. And for more information, go to boundlesspod.com. Here with good friend Ervin Ling, and in Taipei today. This is a live podcast, first one ever with food.
Live? Somebody's watching?
Well, not live.
Okay.
We're live. We're in person here.
We are.
But we'll be eating the first part. So we'll be eating some local, great Taiwanese food. I might attempt some Chinese sayings. We also have a cat that is around. There's a video if you want to follow along. And we'll be diving into Erv's story, which is about he, much like me, quit his corporate job when he was 30, traveled the world for a year, has been living in Taiwan for the last year plus, and now teaching English. And we'll talk a bit about how he's reinvented himself here. So, welcome to the podcast, Erv.
Thank you, Paul. Great to have you here in Taipei.
Awesome. So, what are we eating here?
Well, here we just have some dumplings, a lot of dumplings, and we have some dried noodles and some vegetables. So this is a basic Taiwanese lunch. It's very quick and it's very cheap. This big spread here costs us about $8
Combined, right?
Combined. So
$3.50 each.
right. This
Not
is
bad.
a pretty well balanced meal, I would say, and very delicious.
Awesome. So I've been learning some Chinese.
Okay.
We have fried dumpling here.
Right. These are the pot stickers.
So this would be guotie.
Guotie.
Awesome.
And don't take my Mandarin as the elite because I'm learning as well.
Awesome. So this is steamed dumpling which
These are the
would
boiled.
be jiaozu.
Boiled are sui jiao.
Sui jiao. Jiaozu is steamed.
Jiaozi is just an overall term for dumpling.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
Nice. And then noodles, mian.
Mian. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And then you can just call this tai as an overall term for vegetables, or su tai. All right.
Awesome.
How is it?
Pretty good. So we're
Okay.
going to try and attempt to ask Erv some questions while we're eating.
We're hungry. So.
Definitely an experiment. The cat is in the picture now.
That's Haichu.
Hi, Chu. So Erv, you quit your job, traveled the world for a year, but I've talked to many people, and I'm not sure anyone has been as methodical as you were in planning your leap. You did not just decide I'm going to leave in a couple months. You decided, I think it was over a year ahead of time, right?
A year and a half, actually.
So what was the moment when you were like, okay, I need to make a leap?
Well, it was actually a very exciting weekend and day that I planned to kind of take this leap. I was in Dallas, Texas, for the 2014 Final Four, the national championship, men's basketball, and my alma mater, University of Connecticut Huskies.
Is that why you wear the shirt?
That's exactly why, and it's the only UConn thing I have here in Taipei. So they were playing in the national championship. I was down there for the weekend and just trying to enjoy the weekend with my friends, the atmosphere, all the festivities. And I was also, it was just a weekend where I had to work as well.
Never fun.
Of course not, right? Who wants to work on the weekend? But I understood that, there needed to be things done for my job, their responsibilities. So, during that time, in the mornings, I would wake up early, go down the lobby, do what I had to do, send the emails. But then, it came to a point where, I saw that my friends, they were on college game day. I saw them in the background.
Oh, man, that sucks.
And, I was in the lobby doing my work. But it wasn't that exact moment where I said, okay, let's drop everything and go around the world or do something crazy. It was probably right as I was walking into the final game, UConn versus Kentucky. After a few beers and some tailgating, I threw it out there to my group of friends that I was with. If UConn wins the national championship, I'm going to quit my job.
Oh, my God.
So
I didn't know about the stipulation.
Well, it was kind of a joke, obviously, but
yeah.
After UConn had won and, the whole, all the emotions of the game and having the result that we all wanted.
Wow.
I said, why not? When we were in a 8 seed.
I think we were definitely an underdog that year.
8.
But it was
Actually, I think it was a 7 seed because they beat Villanova, who was a 2 seed,
Nice.
round 2. So yeah.
So let's back up a bit. So you grew up in Connecticut like me. We met in college over 15 years ago. I think both of us were, I guess, what you would call like high achievers, good at tests, good at school, good at getting grades.
I love tests.
And you took a path to be an actuary, took a number of tests. I think there's 8 tests you passed, and that's kind of like your progression through your career.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back on like all of that you did, you always had the next test, the next like bump in your career, your salary. Do you wish you had taken a different path, or are you grateful for kind of going through that?
I'm certainly grateful for all the opportunities that I was given. I have my family is from China. They grew up in communist era, and now I kind of see the differences that growing up in China compared to the U.S. And there's certainly a lot of differences. So I'm certainly grateful for the opportunities I had to be able to go to UConn, get my degree, get a good job, and the process of it was pretty structured in my mind. I kind of had it all, I wouldn't say exactly planned out, but I knew that I wanted to go to college, get a degree that would allow me to find a good job and hopefully make some money and all the other steps along the line, which may or may not include getting a house, getting a family, things like that.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this resonates. I mean, when I was growing up, there's kind of just an assumption that those things would happen and there's a path.
Certainly.
Everything is easy path for you when you're younger with school. You just go to the next grade the next year. But you don't really know how it's going to happen. You just assume that is the path.
Right. And growing up in a fairly non-traditional, I would say suburban Connecticut home, I had a single mom. So I saw how hard she had worked, and I knew that, kind of part of the Chinese culture is you take care of your elders, as they grow older. So that means you got to make sure you can take care of them.
Right.
And that would mean money.
Yeah. But interesting, I think, like almost in American culture, money has become a way to like pay other people to take care of your family now.
That's true. Yeah. But it's still not that way in China or in Asia in general.
Yeah.
My mom actually plans to go back to China when she retires, and buy a house there and kind of live in America and China as well.
Awesome. So, you planned your So UConn won the finals game.
Mm-hmm.
You decided you were seriously going to do this. Like, was there a waiting period before you started planning for the trip?
Well, first I wanted to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, or, if I was going to travel, how long, where I wanted to travel, if I was going to, pursue some other path. There's definitely some point of a portion of research and making sure that, I was able to do it, both financially, probably not physically, but a little bit mentally.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a big leap coming, from 9 to 5, 8 to 7, in some cases, 8 to 8,
Yeah.
to kind of living on the road or just doing something non-traditional.
Awesome. So you planned the trip, you started making preparations. How did just the mindset shift of knowing you were going on this trip change your behavior in the short term, even though you're still working? Did it kind of reframe your relationship with like money and how you're spending your time?
Oh, with money, certainly. I knew I had to save money, and I knew that there were some expenses in my life that probably, I certainly don't need within the next year or so before I left. And just kind of how I dealt with my relationships as well, with my friends and my job, of course, and how I would bring this up to my parents.
Telling your mom was were you scared of doing that?
I wouldn't say scared. I was a little apprehensive in terms of how she would react. And I think from her perspective, I don't think she actually knew what was going on. I don't think she's ever heard of anybody doing anything
She's
like
not
this.
on Instagram?
No. Yeah, she doesn't follow all the travel bloggers.
Right.
And so, I talked about it with her afterwards. She kind of thought it was a phase. That I would, go out, have fun, do what I had to do, but then I would get back to maybe not the corporate life, but something to progress my life going forward, whether it was getting another full-time job, starting a business, doing something that would make me financially stable.
Right. So, traveling the world for a year, you documented this as any good actuary would do, down to like day by day, meal by meal expenses. And you were living in Chicago, and your trip was actually cheaper to live than you were spending in Chicago. Did that surprise you that it was cheaper, or is that something you expected researching and going in?
I don't think it surprised me that it was cheaper. But that's also kind of how I like to travel and live. I don't need to stay in hotels.
Yeah.
And eat fancy dinners, things like that. But also, I'm a pretty frugal person overall. But that didn't stop me from, just living life to the fullest when I was, in these exotic places. But just the big difference I saw was just figuring out what I needed.
Yeah.
And what were excessive.
Yeah. Did you overpack at the beginning?
Certainly. Yeah. After the first stop, I probably dropped maybe a quarter of what I brought. I donated.
That's awesome.
It.
So what were some of the things that you think you didn't actually need when you were traveling?
And people might have a different thought about this. Is a lot of the clothes.
Yeah.
You can always buy new stuff. I ended up buying a bunch of T-shirts and socks and underwear and things like that. And you can look at it as kind of wasteful, but it's more about, what are necessary expenses. You need lodging, food, general security, but overall it was I think the biggest thing I spent my money on was the travel insurance for the year.
Oh, wow.
Like the single biggest expense.
Yeah. So how much did your trip cost? It was around 24,000?
I think it was, actually I have to go back to the spreadsheet, my wonderful spreadsheets. I think it was somewhere around there. It could be 25,000 or 35,000. But yeah, it was all down there.
That's still pretty good.
Certainly, and there was a lot of expenses. I had to get a new iPhone because I dropped mine in the ocean, which actually the travel insurance paid for.
Oh, wow.
So, good purchase.
Nice. So what do you think holds people back from doing things like this?
I think just the unknown. They're not exactly sure what's out there. And it doesn't have to be travel. It could be anything that somebody wants to pursue, but afraid because of the financial insecurity. Whether I think safety might be a concern to some people.
For sure.
Depending on kind of where you travel, who you're with. Of course, traveling alone is certainly different than traveling with a group of friends. And other than that, I think, like I said, just the unknown. They're not sure what's gonna happen. But that's life. We could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and that'd be it.
So what were the unexpected things when you were traveling? Did you come face to face with that uncertainty and try to figure out, okay, what actually am I doing? It's a pretty big shift from moving from the workforce to just kind of traveling, right? Mm-hmm. At first, it's probably really fun. You're probably trying to meet everyone, but then you're probably settling more into a rhythm. You're grappling with, I think a lot of people have talked about loneliness when they're traveling. You're kind of around a lot of people, but not truly connected or like building those friendships. So how did you grapple with some of those things?
I think the big thing is to be flexible and certainly open-minded. And, people say this all the time, go with your gut. And, you can say no.
Yeah.
You don't have to say yes to kind of every event, every pub crawl, every everything that's going on. I certainly took a lot of kind of me days where I just sat in the hostel or went to a park and read or listened to a podcast, just kind of chill. But other than that, it was more kind of deciding who I wanted to spend my time with.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different kinds of travelers. And that's part of kind of being flexible. I was the kind of person where, I can go to, like I said, a pub crawl with these young 20-year-olds that just want to drink and have fun. But I also, I met a monk. I met artists and went to museums.
So let's talk about the monk. That sounds interesting.
Okay.
What was that like? Where'd this happen? What was the...
This was in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. He was a Hare Krishna monk, and he was kind of in between stays at a monastery. So he was just kind of like me, just traveling around, but in a different certainly a different way.
Yeah.
We went to a really nice vegetarian dinner at a Chinese restaurant in Buenos Aires, Argentina, which is nice. A little strange, but I certainly enjoyed it. But we kind of hung out for a few days, but I had to go on, and he had to go his own separate way. But it's just one of those connections that you'll remember, but it's up to you to decide, okay, is this something that was worthwhile?
Yeah.
Certainly I've had plenty of other conversations that, that I might have just forgotten. Doesn't mean they weren't worthwhile. It was just maybe not memorable, but it doesn't really take away from who that person is, because they're going to have the same kind of connections with other people.
So at what point in this trip were you starting to visualize or see the end of the trip and thinking, oh boy, I have to come up with what I'm going to do next? Like, either in your head you can't do this forever, or it's about finding what is the path forward.
Right.
When did that start creeping in?
So I kind of had a vague plan of what I was going to do when I finished the trip, and it was an around the world trip. So by the time I got to Europe, the only one direction I could have gone was back to the United States.
Yeah.
But even before that, I had decided that I wanted to learn Mandarin. I wasn't sure exactly what level I wanted. Obviously, it would be great to be fluent. But because my family mostly speaks Mandarin, I wanted to have a better way of communicating with them. My Mandarin was not up to par. Let's say.
They speak a different dialect at home too, right?
That too, but everybody in China speaks Mandarin.
Yeah.
So there were two places that I could potentially move to kind of immerse myself, and that was China or Taiwan. So China was the obvious choice. I have family there. That's the biggest country. Shanghai, Beijing, where there are a lot of foreigners as well. There's a lot of people that go there to work. But after visiting Taiwan, I was here for a week during that trip. I kind of felt that I was a little more comfortable here. It's definitely a pretty good lifestyle.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Paul?
I love it.
He loves it here.
But during your trip, you also went to China, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you spent, you visited some family, and I think, what was it, 1 month, 2 months?
In China, it was 1 month total. It was 2 separate 2-week stints.
And what was that like? I mean, that's the longest stretch since you had moved from China when you were very young, that you were in China, right?
I actually visited every 4 or 5 years when I was going through school. And it was usually for a couple of weeks to see family. It was fair. It was pretty similar to those other trips. The Chinese family, they love to feed you and take care of you, take you to see the Chinese doctor, the Eastern medicine, and they were just happy to see me, and I was entirely grateful to them because my grandmother, who lives in China, did raise me till I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
So I do have a very close connection with them, even though there are some communication issues. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So during that time, you're getting better at Chinese. Had you been to Taiwan at that point when you were in China?
I had not.
Okay, so you're thinking maybe I'll still go to China, but then you ended up going to Taiwan. So when you're here, you were also thinking, okay, maybe after my trip, I go back to the U.S. for a bit, but then I'd spend some time learning Mandarin a little deeper.
Right. I would come here. The plan was to come here, find a job teaching English, and the reason I chose that was I think it's the easiest job to find as a foreigner,
right?
In an Asian country. So yeah, that was the plan.
So when you started your trip, did you ever think, okay, I'll just go back to the corporate world or the business world, or like when you walked out that door that final day, it was September 2015, 2015,
October 1st actually.
Like in your head, were you like, I'm never coming to one of these office buildings again? I mean, who knows? Life is long, right?
Yeah. But, that was probably the first thing I was thinking about. Goodbye forever.
Wow. Okay, so now you're living in Taiwan. You've kind of reinvented your life. Are you happy with this reinvention? Like, what have you found on the other side of like recreating a new life for yourself?
Certainly
happy. I don't even know if you would use such bold terms.
I'm certainly happy. I think I found contentment in not only life, but kind of what I see life in the future. I realize that you don't need a lot to be happy.
Yeah.
I am here lucky enough to have a job that pays pretty well compared to the locals, and I find it fulfilling for the most part.
Yeah.
I'm not overly working. I would say probably under 20 hours a week.
Paid work.
Paid.
Yeah.
But also I'm doing, other things that kind of I'm interested in, things that I probably didn't have time for before.
Yeah. Like what?
For photography, we certainly had discussions on our cameras and kind of how to edit and these new tools and diving into all these YouTube videos. There's also, I'm trying to figure out other ways to, like you, do things that to make money, but not having to go through that whole structured process. Yeah. Now, that's not to say I don't want to go back to kind of the 9 to 5. I think it's probably more of the work.
Right.
How fulfilling it is, how it's helping people, things like that.
Awesome. So, what are the types of students you're teaching English?
So I've taught, over the past year and a half, I've taught people aged from 5 to 55.
Yeah.
So at my first job, it was mostly young professionals and people that wanted to improve their English either for work, to travel, or they had some proficiency tests that they had to take to get a job or to kind of go take the next step in their studies and their career. What I'm doing now is I'm teaching elementary school students up to junior high as well. And for that, it's totally different. It's more structured. It's a lot of phonics, making sure the pronunciation is correct. But for me, I've also learned a lot from my students.
Yeah, I bet.
I kind of see, the things that they have to go through to do well in school here, and also after school, in their work, when they're, they have to learn English at a late age, kind of like what I'm doing with Chinese. So there's a lot of, I wouldn't say empathy, but
yeah,
I see where they're coming from a lot, and I kind of resonate a lot with, the things that they're going through.
Yeah. Have you noticed anything about the language as you kind of knew Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
But better than most people. You are pretty much you're a native English speaker.
Right.
What have you noticed, like, differences of the languages as you've gone from, like, Chinese to English back to Chinese? Anything that's, like, made you have, like, oh, wow, this is kind of crazy how different people communicate?
I think every language is just so unique.
Yeah.
That I think every day there's something new that you learn. So you had that podcast talking about different sounds that people make.
Yeah.
I just saw something on YouTube the other day where Taiwanese people, they speak a lot differently than mainland China. based on some of the tones and different ways they make up words and things like that. Between English and Chinese, I think the biggest thing is probably the gender aspect. People tend to mix up he and she all the time, and
in Chinese,
because they don't have gender specific sounds.
And he or she is just ta.
Ta.
Got it.
Right. It's written differently, so you'd be able to tell when you read it, but when somebody says it, it's ambiguous.
Oh, wow. That must make it really confusing when people are talking about new friends or new relationships when they're talking about them.
Certainly.
Interesting. So I keep asking you questions and you're trying to eat, but
that's fine.
Try to lengthen the question a bit. But so you grew up in China very young. You don't really have a lot of memories of it. Mostly grew up in the U.S., had your Chinese culture at home, probably very similar to like my culture as soon as you lost, or our culture as Connecticut residents as you left the house. And now traveling the world and living back in Taiwan, like how have you thought about like your cultural identity and like how you think of like home and like the place in the world?
Home is
question.
Interesting. Yeah, home is an interesting word. I've always thought of Connecticut as home, actually, and I still kind of do, because that's the place that kind of shaped me the most. I mean, that's where I spend most of my life.
Right.
So that would make sense. But I think home right now is the place where I'm happy and I'm comfortable, and I'm thousands and thousands of miles away from my quote unquote comfort group and comfort zone, but that was 5 years ago, and I found myself kind of taking that comfort with me wherever I go. So it's a mobile home.
Awesome. I like a tiny house.
Yeah, tiny house on wheels.
And then like how have you thought about culture? Just as like being Chinese, growing up in America, and now being Chinese, but also being a Westerner and living in Taiwan.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because when I first got here, people they were surprised that I didn't speak Chinese because I am. They say I have an Asian face, right? The Asian face. So which I do.
There's
obviously.
like a phrase for that.
They just say you look like you should be able to speak Chinese, essentially. But then I grew a beard, and then they kind of left me alone. So I think it's I try not to take some of the comments, and they're not meant to be offensive.
Yeah.
But it's more demoralizing a little bit, where I kind of feel like I should be able to fit in a certain way.
Okay.
But I'm happy that I have these different identities.
Yeah.
One with my friends, one with my family, one with my girlfriend. I think it's good to have these different these faces, these different hats.
Yeah.
To borrow a corporate term.
Yeah, that's interesting in Taiwan. I mean, if I walk anywhere in Taiwan, I'm clearly like the white guy, and they're just like, "Are you from Britain, Australia, or America?"
Right.
And with you, they might be expecting one thing, and then you might be struggling with the language a bit, and they'll be like, "What the heck? What are you doing?"
Yeah, and you get used to it. I think in any place, if you've been there a while. If you're here for years and years, you're still going to get those looks. I'm talking about you.
Yeah, right.
But, it's something that I think people should expect, but also it's certainly interesting to experience for the first time.
Yeah. So, what might you tell someone that's like maybe they're sitting at their desk right now, as a lovely subscriber to this podcast, and kind of saying, well, this is great. Like, he didn't have any responsibilities. He can do this. What would you say to somebody to kind of encourage them, especially someone that might be a little more risk averse? I think you're definitely somebody that I would describe as risk averse, but also like willing to go on adventures. Like, what advice or things you've learned might you share?
I think the biggest one is just try to prioritize what you value in life. If it's family, then figure out ways to spend more time with them. If it's, if you love working on cars, find a way to incorporate that more into your life. I'm not saying everybody should quit their job and, do whatever, but, if it's food, find more time to cook or find more time to eat. I mean, I always find time to eat regardless of where and when. So kind of, it doesn't take too long to figure out what's important to you, right? And even if you love your job, then keep doing your job.
Yeah.
It's more about, what makes you content, what makes you happy.
That's awesome. It's a good part to close on. I appreciate you sharing your story and, as always, being my food guide to Taipei.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Paul.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Boundless Podcast. If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or ideas I should explore, I'd really love to hear from you. One of the best things about this journey I've been on is connecting with all the people from around the world who are resonating with some of the ideas, some crazy, some better, some worse, that I'm putting out into the world. You can email me at paul@think-boundless.com or find me on the various socials, which I link in my site. So I'm focused on keeping this podcast ad-free, clear of requests for ratings on various platforms. Basically just want to keep it useful, interesting, and worth listening to. You guys hear enough about different underwear and sleep mattresses that people are pushing. I mean, how many mattresses can people sell? It's unbelievable. Anyway, if you do want to support this podcast and support this crazy journey I'm on, you can do that on Patreon through the show notes link. And this is just so much fun. And I really thank you for listening and the continued feedback and support.